Hey everybody, welcome to We've Got Worm, a Daily Planet Films podcast series where we expertly dissect and discuss the hit web serial Worm week by week, arc by arc. My name is Matt Freeman, your host and brilliant biologist tinkering with powers I can't possibly hope to control. And I'm joined as always by my co-host Scott Daly, a homegrown homunculus created to help me in my studio. Scott, how are you doing today?
I'm doing so great, Matt. It is my purpose. And as you said, this is the podcast where you, a worm expert, guide me, a first-time reader, through Wildbow's world of superhumans, supervillains, and everything in between as I inspect, interpret, and even speculate on what the story is and where it is going. It's very hard to read that sentence when you're laughing in the background.
Sorry. I'll try to do better next time.
This week, we are beginning Arc 19 Scourge, which we're covering chapters 19.1 through 19.4, including one interlude, a bonus interlude. We pick up in this section directly where we left off with our confrontation with Noelle continuing. We have Taylor incapacitated, Tattletale seemingly with a plan to win somehow, and we follow Tattletale. This is a very Tattletale-centric section where we follow her plans as she kind of increasingly becomes reckless and unhinged, Matt. It's very interesting.
Yeah, the Tattletale stuff is particularly interesting. I mean, there's actually a lot of secondary character work here, if that term is the right term here. There's a lot of characterization beats on a fairly broad number of characters, and there's really no combat in the main story itself. It's all, if there's any combat, it's in the interlude. So we're just getting these interesting character development along a lot of secondary characters, and like you said, a major focus on what's going on with Tattletale.
Yeah, and it's really cool. I like it a lot. It is, I'm kind of continually surprised because after the first half of Arc 18, I was like, okay, we built up, it's action time, and I was right. The second half of Arc 18 was very action heavy, but because we treat these arcs as their own kind of arc, there's always, even when we move into a new arc, even if it picks up right after the other one left off, there is still this lowering of action kind of, and then we slowly ramp up and build up just like it was its own independent story. So we're seeing that here. We kind of start in media res, but then this action and this tension is quickly deflated, and then we move back into our rising action as pieces begin to move again for the next phase in the encounter against Echidna. It's good stuff.
Yeah, I just realized that what I said is technically wrong because it does actually start off with action, but you're right. It actually starts off with action and then it segues into a more slow burn situation.
Yeah, and I would say that's it's fair too, because the action, like Taylor is very passive in the action because she's kind of incapacitated throughout most of it. So while there is action going on, because she's not actively participating in it, doesn't feel like the standard worm fights.
Yeah, I agree with that. That may be why my brain registered it that way.
Yeah.
All right. Well, let's get into the comments and questions this week, Scott.
Sure thing.
So first of all, Wildbow says, I guess I'll just read it. He says, I found it interesting that you remarked on Weld being caught up in cape life. A lot of people walk away from the interlude with the take that Weld is more or better adjusted and at peace. And I didn't get the vibe that you guys felt that way about him. We've had a lot of action-packed events in a short span of time. Do you guys have any thoughts on the balance of action versus character moments at this stretch in the story? So let's take the Weld question first, I guess.
Yeah. So we actually got a lot of responses like this from various different people in the Reddit thread about they either disagreed with our Weld take. Wildbow, of course, in his clever way, leaves the question much more open for us, not saying specifically what he thinks or what he was going for, because he's clever. But I think there's a lot of people that said, no, your read on Weld was wrong. He's very happy. He's very content. He doesn't need that human name. I don't agree with that. I think, well, first of all, the idea of the name was very symbolic. It was symbolic for Jessica Yamada as a way of differentiating the human side from the cape side for these people. And I think the Weld that we see in this moment is one who is if he is content, it's just because he buries him so into his career and so into his work that he doesn't have time to realize the uncomfortable truths that lay behind it of who he is and where he came from and what people see him as. And I think to kind of prove that correctly, we see in this interlude or this arc that he is directly confronted with that, you know, when the chance to find out where they came from and what the truth behind the Case 53s, he breaks rank and he goes with his fellow monsters, quote unquote, to disobey orders. And so, I mean, I think it's too simple to say that he was just at peace and he was totally well adjusted and great.
Yeah. Again, this is a very well timed question, like you said, because I think it might even be fair to say that prior to this very half arc or arc in general, we haven't seen really too much evidence that would suggest that Weld is out of sorts. Like, we've been in his head, and he didn't have a woe is me attitude about being a Case 53, and he consistently is like, oh no, it's no big deal. It's really no big deal. It's water off my back. But we also did see that, like, I think maybe it's easy to gloss over this, but like the first character beat from Weld is him being a little bit irritated with the way people are treating him. Yeah. And then he kind of like buttons that down and handles it. And here, like you said, we're seeing him break ranks, and it shows that kind of maybe things are getting under his skin a bit more than he lets on.
Yeah. And, you know, it's funny because even the reason why I went there, and I agree that in last section, I don't think we had all the pieces of evidence we need to definitively conclude on that. I think we got it in this arc, but also you're kind of going down a list of these wards who every single one of them has some sort of problem. Like, every single one of them is either deflecting or like projecting or like frustrated or like losing hope. And then you have Weld. And I just think for him for the text to be definitively saying, no, Weld's fine. That just seems like contrary to everything that we were doing with that interlude. So that's what led me to think, like, no, there's something more going on here. And the name thing, the code name versus human name thing that Jessica is hitting again and again throughout this interlude is a perfect symbol of what it seems that Weld's general problem is, that he's not dealing with this other side of him. He's just being Weld the Cape and not being a human being, which he still very much is. And and so that's why I came to that conclusion.
Yeah. All right. And regarding the second question was having to do with the fact that we've had a lot of action-packed events in a short span of time, and asking if we had any thoughts about balance of action versus character moments. So
I wonder, does he mean short span of time, like within the time passing in universe, or does he just mean we've had a lot of action-packed arcs?
I guess you could take it both ways.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, that's an interesting question. I'm not exactly. I would be inclined to take it in terms of
story structure itself.
Like page wise rather than
yeah. I don't have a problem with the balance personally. There is a lot of action in this book, and it's because it's like when you're telling a superhero story, to not have any action, I feel like would be disingenuous to the genre. But I think Wildbow not only has those beats where it's just a lot of character work, which is almost all of this arc that we're going to be talking about today, but even in those action beats, like we've talked about again and again, he works in character moments in that as well. So I feel like the balance is struck. I don't feel like, especially recently, even with all the action, like earlier in the book, you and I would get to an action sequence in our recap, and we would just be like, okay, now, blah, 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 fighting. Let's move on. And we haven't been able to do that recently. And I think that's probably partially why our episodes have been getting longer and longer, because we can't yada yada over some of the action because there's so much character stuff in it. So I don't have a problem with it at all. No, I think the balance that is struck here is very good. And I think it still errs on the side of more character moments than it does action moments, which I think is the goal of the piece. So yeah, I'm fine with it.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. Just today, actually, we were talking about kind of my feelings about narrative economy and story economy, and how like I wasn't trying to make a judgment one way or the other. It was more of an observation of like the web serial format really lends itself to this type of sprawling story where you have all of these secondary characters who are very well fleshed out, because you have that space to give them all their moment. And like part of me sometimes is like, maybe this could be tightened up here or there, but then the other part of me is like, well, tightened up, like the flip side of tightening it up means you risk lessening the impact of certain secondary character moments, which is really not what you want in this story in particular, because this is not just Taylor's story. This is story of all these wards and all the undersiders and all the travelers, and it's you don't want to say like, let's just get to the get to the action. No, like nobody really wants you to just get to the action. Like so I was if anything, even right now I'm sort of like parsing through my ideas rather than like making any kind of judgment about it. I just think it's interesting, and I think this is a great question because it primes you to think about like the where we're spending our time and why it's good that we're spending our time where we're spending it.
Yeah, and I think when we get to the end of this Echidna section of the book, we could maybe look back and say, is this something that needed to have been told in 2 arcs? Could it have been told in 1? We can have those conversations, but I mean, when you're in it, like when you're reading the thing, not taking the step back and looking at it at the 10,000 foot level that we kind of do once we finish a big part, but when you're in the middle of it, it never feels like the character moments never feel like slow down. The action moments never feel like I just want to get through this action to get to more character beats. Like it doesn't feel like that when you're in the middle of it. So I think that's a sign that the text is working.
Yeah, I agree. I don't have any complaints on that level.
Yeah. I think that actually is a great segue into our next comment, though.
Yeah. So I'm going to summarize this one because it's relatively long, but it's from user Semiurge. Was this a YouTube comment?
No, I think this was Reddit. Yeah.
This is a Reddit comment. Okay. And the comment, just to summarize, is basically this user is pleasantly surprised that we're bringing sort of this attempt at a deep literary analysis to a story like this, and that it's valuable. But then they go on to say that there's a glut of unjustifiably negative like internet commentary about Worm, and I would make a personal aside to say there's a glut of unjustifiably negative internet criticism about everything. But they're wondering if maybe we could like take the risk of veering into some negativity, or rather, like we could maybe go more critical, I guess is what they're saying, right, Scott? Like we could stand to be a little bit more critical. What's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think we've talked about this a little bit before, and we've talked about how there are moments that when I think something is just flat out not working, that I'm going to bring it up and I'm going to talk about it, and we're going to try to get down to not just criticize for criticism's sake, but let's look at why this didn't work. Why was this not as why this beat didn't land as well, why this motivation was a little more confusing than it is in other places. I think we try to do that. I think Arc 16 is a good example of a spot that we did that, at least the first half of that arc, where I was not a big fan of a lot of the events that happened in that. And like I've said before, there are like this is a story that's published very fast. It hasn't gone through the kind of detailed editing that a lot of books go through, where you have like an editor actually sit down and go through every single thing. So there are little things that, like you talked about, like, story economy and tightening up. There are like just little ways of phrasing things and structuring things that you could pick apart. That kind of stuff I'm just flat out not interested in doing. But also, I think a lot more largely, I like this book. And so because I'm enjoying the book, I think it's much more, not only is it more entertaining, but it's much more fulfilling for me to examine why I like it and to hopefully teach people that just have read it for fun and know that they like it, but maybe don't understand from like a deep literary reason why you like something. Why did this work on you? And I think it's fun to explore that, and it's less fun to go totally negative all the time.
Yeah, I don't really have much to add on that. I was just thinking about how we did a review of the latest season of Game of Thrones. What was that, last night?
Yeah.
That was on our other podcast channel, and we're spoilers. We're kind of negative on it. That was the spoilers, by the way. I'm not going to say any real spoilers. We're kind of negative on the season, and like on some level, it's like it's its own kind of fun to like pick apart something and diagnose what was wrong with it, and maybe suggest things that could be improved. And everyone does that, and I do that, and like it's easy to do, and that's why the internet is full of it. This is like, I see what we're doing as, I don't know, it's more valuable to me personally to doing this podcast, because I feel like every single episode I'm learning better about very like micro level techniques of how to make a story work and connect. And just, I don't know, I learn a lot more doing it this way than I would if I were just nitpicking and criticizing.
Yeah. And to Simir's credit, I don't think he's specifically, or she is specifically asking us to nitpick, but just, if something doesn't work, please explain it, and please don't be afraid to do that. And I think, that's something that I will definitely take under advisement, and we will try to do when the opportunity arises. But the honest fact here, folks, is I really love this story so far. So if I were to try in every episode to find something negative, to find something that that didn't land quite as well as I wanted it to, it would get down to nitpicking. It would get down to reading the text with a specific slant of, let's find something to be negative about. And that's just not something I really want to do. I don't think it's something that would be very fun to listen to. But I will say that when stuff doesn't work, we are going to make sure to point out that it doesn't work for us, and hopefully go into why it doesn't work, and not just criticize for the sake of criticism, but say this is what it failed to do, and this is in a different place in the book where it worked, and here's where it didn't. Yeah,
I think that's all very fair, and I think we have done that in the past where it was necessary, and I think we will do that going forward.
Yeah, but thank you for your comment. I appreciate that, and thanks for your kind words about how we analyze the good stuff. We try very hard, so I'm glad to see, whenever I see people say that kind of thing, that like people that have never looked at something with this kind of like literary analysis, which frankly, Matt, and this is a little bit of a tangent, but like I think you can do this with every single type of book out there. Like the idea that because it's genre fiction or something that it can't be looked at in this kind of way is ridiculous to me, and I refuse to believe that. So one of the reasons we decided to do this is because we found out that this really hadn't been done for this story, and you felt it deserved it, and I read the first arc and said, yeah, this is some interesting stuff, let's go. So I'm happy that people are responding to it.
Yeah I mean, I guess I'm not disagreeing with you, but I would say like this project wouldn't really work the way it works if Wildbow didn't have this pervasive sense of themes and character arcs and really do that really solidly. Because I mean, if it were just a story where it was just a story meant to entertain and didn't have themes, then a lot of what we talk about would just sort of not be available. I
guess I should rephrase and say you can do this with any good book. If you're just gonna get down, you could attempt this with a lot of other books and not be as successful because the material is not dense. But I'm just saying that just because it's genre, just because it's not operating in the world of literary fiction, does not mean that it does not have the things that all novels do, and the rules of storytelling and the rules of these things that create engaging stories that people like.
Yeah, and I'm getting dangerously close to death of the author territory here, but I've heard it said, and I think I agree, that that you can find themes in a work that the author didn't consciously put there, but they did unconsciously put them there because they were the things that were on their mind when they were writing it.
Yep.
And it's completely valid to find and identify what those things are and talk about them. And it's quite enjoyable, actually.
Yeah. Yeah. So that's that. That was a great comment. I really appreciated that. And I love doing this. So thank you. Yeah.
All right, Scott, let's get into the beat by beat.
Sweet.
We open up 19.1 and we're very confused unless we remember where we left off, because Taylor thinks she's at school and that the whole world around her is throbbing to a pulse, and she's reeling and being shoved, and her body is being torn apart and breaking every time people bump into her. And the three bullies surround her and taunt her as they beat her.
Yeah, and we immediately get this answer to that question that I had last week, which is, how do we continue the story from Taylor's point of view when she's incapacitated? Well, the answer to that is, of course, in the classic worm type way, is we go into her head and watch her suffer horribly. And like, for the next half of this chapter, we're going to see Taylor relive some of these worst moments in her life, but it's not just normal reliving of them. It's like a terrible extreme version of those events, versions that make Taylor hate everyone, hate herself. So I love that this fits into everything we know about the clones, because Taylor is now reliving these nightmares and these worst parts of her life, but everything cranked up to like an 11. And that is kind of what the clones represent, is their trauma and everything, but cranked up to the worst possible version of it. So they just react crazy to it. So you can kind of understand why these clones come pooping out in crazy form.
Yeah. I found myself wondering, like, as we get deeper into her kind of hallucination, if like, you know, how much can you read into the fact that she's being given these visions? Like, can we go all the way to the point where we say, like, this is happening in order to, like, give these clones trigger events, like by proxy? I mean,
it could be. Yeah,
I don't necessarily think that's the case, but it is interesting that it puts you in the state very close to the trigger event. I don't think there's no reason for it. Like, there's got to be a reason why why Noelle's power does this.
Yeah, and we see through Gruel later on that the experience is not just singular. It's not just Taylor going through this, because obviously something happens to Gruel while he's in there that like almost makes him catatonic. Mm-hmm. But it's kind of not hard to believe in this moment that maybe Tattletale's specific level of self-hatred and guilt kind of makes this even worse than it might have been for anyone else. Because, like, the details here, like the damage that's done to Taylor, like some guy shoves past her and like his bag gets caught on her nostril and rip her nostrils open, and like someone just steps on her hand and it breaks. Like this real feeling of like fragility here as anyone touches her. And it's kind of like they just ignore her. They don't see her, but she's so fragile and so breakable, kind of like bugs,
mm-hmm.
Matt? Maybe
being ignored and trodden underfoot. Yeah.
And it's interesting again that Taylor's view of her treatment, of people treating her like this, comes into play even before we see the trio of bullies get to her. Because this fits with we know about her, that she kind of felt this way about herself before she had to go through this experience with these three, and they just kind of sensed that weakness in her and exploited it. And so here she's ripped apart and broken, and that is when they descend upon her. And like, we're reliving these moments and in a terrible possible way, but also we're getting to see, you know, maybe into Taylor's psyche a little bit as we do, that like this is how she sees herself in these moments, and it's tough.
Yeah, that's really interesting, because it is like a chronological series of the worst things that have happened to her. And you're right. Yeah. The first thing that happens is not, oh, there's the three bullies. The first thing that happens is like the indifference and casual violence of strangers, basically.
Yep.
So,
yep.
Interesting point. So she realizes as she's being beaten by the bullies that she should give up. But instead, because she's Taylor, she searches for a weapon, and she knows there's some weapon that's supposed to be there. She's supposed to have it. And that forces her to break through briefly so that she's able to perceive the world outside Echidna's stomach. through her bugs. And she sees Echidna clambering up toward Tattletale, who is backing off and defending herself with a handgun.
Yeah.
And then
Yeah, and this solves another problem that I was thinking about as we finished up last week, that how with Taylor inside Echidna can we be observing the things that are happening on around her? And of course, it's through her powers. Of course, it makes sense. And I want to kind of get a little writer nerdy here for a bit, because you can kind of imagine Wildbow getting to this point in the story and realizing that he wants Taylor to get eaten and have these visions and have like an insight into her psyche and what happens when people are inside Echidna. But B, he wants to have this battle between Tattletale and Echidna to happen. He wants the audience to be able to observe this. But how can you do both? Because the rules of our book say we have to be in Taylor's point of view unless we're like in an interlude chapter or an interlude arc. And that's not where we are here. So you're presented with this problem. How do you do this? And a good writer can see this problem and come up with a solution that doesn't break the rules of the book or the rules of the world. So again, we have, of course, Taylor. Yes, she's incapacitated, but she can sense through her bugs. She can see and hear through them too. And while blind, she's been slowly increasing that ability and that power. So we have this clearly established thing that solves Wildbow's problem here. And it makes the world feel, a little more believable than it normally would.
Yeah, and it's also been established that like her clones can kind of strip her of control of her bugs, so she can perceive through them, but she can't help with the fight.
And when I started going down this line of thinking, I kind of went down a rabbit hole a little bit here, Matt. But like in a normally published book, in just a normal novel, so you're writing and you get to this problem in this chapter, and then you come up with an in-world solution to solve it. And then you can go back and lay the seeds for that solution in earlier chapters. So the solution comes up naturally and feels real. When you're publishing a serial, you can't do that. Wildbow couldn't do that. Like, I'm sure he does do a little bit of planning beforehand. He has a general idea of where he wants a story to go, but the minute little details that cause a problem like this to arise don't necessarily appear to you until you actually like sit down and write the thing. So not only does Wildbow have to find that in-world solution to the problem that doesn't break any of the rules, for it to be believable, it has to be something that was already previously established, maybe for an entirely different purpose. And I think it's remarkable that he's able to do that like consistently, that like there's these traps you can fall into in writing that he's able to kind of navigate around and not lose the realism of the world while still solving all his structural problems and getting through and making a compelling story at the same time, all while doing this basically on the fly as he's going with no ability to edit. It's crazy. Yeah.
Yeah. Like stuff like this is why all of my criticisms about narrative economy in web serials, and this one in particular, always have like a question mark attached to them because like, you can't necessarily, you being, the author, you can't necessarily like make these kind of improvised things work unless you had a lot of space to create a lot of possibilities.
Right.
And if you're going for maximum, cutthroat story economy and only hitting the necessary beats that are necessary to this main through line of delivering this one emotional message, then you might leave out the room to play with these types of things and the kind of the sandbox feeling of like, well, okay, I have this problem. Let me see what have I created up to this point that I can use to solve that problem.
Yeah.
And it's actually a really fun way of telling a story because it allows you to get in the character's head and like you're thinking through the solution with them because you're aware of all of the possibilities that they're aware of.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And of course, I mean, whenever you're talking about narrative economy in a story that's being published on the fly, it's super easy to go back when a work is published and know exactly which beats were not necessary for the overall story, but you can't know that in the moment. So like, I know Wildbow's going back and he's editing the story and he's maybe going to take some stuff out he doesn't need or tighten some stuff up and all that. But when you're publishing on the fly like this, you literally can't do that. Like, how do I know I'm not going to need this beat until the story is at its conclusion? You just don't. And so like the fact that he's able to do this is, again, remarkable. Like, remarkable. I can't, like, he's so good at setting up and paying off and making setups that weren't even for that payoff become part of that payoff.
Yeah, no, that's completely true. I could go on about that for quite a while, and it's, I think, one of the more hidden, less obvious strengths of the format. But we'll just remember to bring that up when it becomes relevant.
Yeah, and I think the most important thing about this, to tie it all back, is that the average reader probably isn't going to notice that, but it works on them anyway. Like, it's like, this is a detail that makes the story feel more believable, and you might not notice that it's happening, but it's working behind the scenes to make the story work. So why did I like this section so much? Why did this moment with Taylor trapped in here and she can see what's going on out there with her bugs, why did that feel so like fulfilling narratively to me? Well, because it was set up well and it paid off well and it was realistic and it didn't break the rules of the world and it did all these things that Wildbow had to do behind the scenes to make it work. You might not notice that, but that's what's happening. Yeah,
I'm going to attempt to make a really strained analogy to different types of video games and how like a more traditional book is more like an RPG where you're on rails and you don't really get to make choices. You're sort of being fed the story. And a story in this format is more like a more open world RPG where there may be multiple ways of solving any given problem. There may be multiple valid choices. You're not actually railroaded into making one particular right choice for any given problem. And it actually engages your creative faculties and your imagination a lot more when you're in that type of game, I feel.
No, yeah, I think that's not an analogy I would have gotten to on my own, but I like it. I like it a lot.
Good. All right, cool. So yeah, Taylor is sucked back into the dream state inside Echidna, and she's back at school again, and she's flinching into a ball as the assault on her becomes more tolerable for a moment until Sophia loops a noose around her neck, and then she's lifted off the ground and drawn strangling into the rancid locker.
And this is, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, is this the first time we've like experienced her trigger event with her? Like, I know she talked about it, but I don't know if you've ever like had the scene play out for us.
Yeah, I think it's something that she kind of flinches away from typically and avoids thinking about.
Yeah, and the thing that really jumped out at me here was that as soon as that moment, that as soon as she gives up and stops trying to fight back, everything becomes more tolerable to her. And this calls back to early book Taylor and an early book Taylor's opinion that fighting back against her bullies just made everything worse. That standing up for herself just caused them to pick on her more. And this is a very early book Taylor thing that we're seeing right now in this flashback memory thing. And it's kind of crazy because it allows you to directly contrast that Taylor with today's Taylor and how they're so different now. Like it allows you to see how much she's changed over the course of this book so far.
Yeah, I mean, that I've never like realized this before, but like if you took this Taylor and shoved her in the equivalent of a tampon locker, which is basically something that's happened to her like 15 times. Like she's right now she's in like a giant monster's gullet. She never even comes close to like having a freak out episode. She is always like, at worst, she's like probably going to die here. I'm getting a little worried. But usually it's just pure Taylor's toolbox, like rationality and like, okay, I'm panicking. I need to calm myself down. But the Taylor that went into that locker is not the same person that came out of it.
Yep.
I almost feel like Taylor's toolbox was born in that locker along with her power.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right.
Yeah. I don't know. That never occurred to me before now. So I'm in love with my thought now.
Yeah, no, I like that a lot. That's very good.
So she snaps back. She snaps back to the bugs and she can see outside again, and she's seeing Tattletale hitting Noelle with a grenade. But then she snaps back into the nightmare, and the setting has shifted, and she's facing Mannequin in a factory,
Her
and then
greatest
back
hits.
outside. Yeah, right. It's all of her worst / best moments. And then back outside, Tattletale has handcuffed herself to something while her other wrist is being sucked into Noelle's mouth by a giant tongue.
It's so gross.
Yeah.
Ugh.
And then, and meanwhile, Rachel sends 3 of her giant dogs against Echidna, who starts absorbing them and basically just adding them to her enormous mass.
I was really concerned about the puppies at this point the first time I read this. Like, I was very scared for them.
Yeah, me too. And then back in the dream again, we're just kind of flipping back and forth fairly rapidly. She tries to fight Mannequin to keep him from killing her loved ones who are kind of all there, but she can't, and she's overcome with this bottomless rage, and she's surrounded, and Bonesaw and Jack and Bakura show up.
Yeah. So not only are we hitting that Taylor's Greatest Hits album stuff, but we're distorting those events to match with her mindset, because this fight with Mannequin, Taylor won. Like, she beat him here. But you remember, her mindset was that she didn't, that by buying time to let her plan out, people got killed and it's all her fault and she couldn't take that victory. So in her mind, that's what happens. We see her fail. We see people die. Her father specifically, she puts her father in this position, even though he wasn't really there, because she feels like the choices she's made has failed her father. And it's like, God, it's so Taylor. Like, it's so Taylor.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting because I guess there's a couple of possible interpretations. Like, one of them is that this is what she's choosing to torture herself with. And another is that, like, well, obviously part of the Echidna power is this ability to, like, basically flay your psyche and create a evil version of you. And part of that is probably involves, like, okay, what makes this person tick? What's their worst fears? And all that. So it's Echidna's power doing this to her sort of in a psychic sense, but of course these are elements that are there to be manipulated in the first place.
Right. Yeah. I don't think, from what I've seen, at least, and my interpretation of it is not that, I don't think Echidna's putting anything there that wasn't there already. She's just, whatever it's doing is just enhancing the thoughts and the feelings and the trauma that was already there, and just making it worse.
Yeah, that feels right. So back outside, Rachel has been overcome by bugs from the other skitters, the clones, and she sees a much larger Echidna ordering a regent to go set Shatterbird free. Oh, good. That's great. Let's just add more shit to this shit sandwich. Yeah, this isn't bad enough yet. So then she sees a duo of skitters politely coordinating with each other to kill Tattletale, so this is, if anything, this is where we start seeing a little bit of that focus on Tattletale. Right. Because basically the skitters are like personally angry at her. And basically they're saying, you're awfully fond of keeping secrets for someone who calls themselves Tattletale. Keeping secrets from me, even at the best of times, even though you knew what I'd gone through. And the skitters continue to needle her about not sharing her trigger event with them. Yeah, and this is a Tattletale arc, seemingly, right? So we're laying we're laying the groundwork here in this moment where we're reestablishing the fact that, hey, like, there's been moments where Lisa has hinted stuff about her past that Taylor's kind of confronted her on, about, why haven't you told me about this yet? And Lisa's kind of deflected and said, later, I'll tell you later, I promise, just trust me for now. And you can see represented through her clones that this is something that on some level does really bother Taylor. And we're getting to see that through her turned up to 11 crazy evil clones. But that's a not so subtle reminder of this kind of tense conflict between the two that's kind of under the surface. But it also starts this road of, we're going to mess with Lisa's head a little bit here, because like they're about to start like screwing with her, and she like attacks, like orders Bentley to attack immediately to try to stop them from it. So it's pretty obvious to me that we are setting up this reveal of Lisa's trigger event. I think before the end of the arc, we're going to get that. Obviously it doesn't happen in this half, so it's got to happen in the second half, but that seems to be the path we're treading, and we're going to continue to hit this beat again and again. We're reminded about the things that
that are questionable about Lisa, and as we see her behave more and more unusually throughout this section.
Yeah, I always like to pay attention in moments like this where Lisa she does have Rachel here, but Rachel's kind of incapacitated and she only has like a couple dogs. That she like her power is not really a very useful like combat power. So she's little more than like a normal person with a gun in this situation, and she keeps putting herself in these situations. So I mean, we've never gone fully down the rabbit hole talking about why Lisa does this to herself. Like a couple of times she's tried to be the one who's like, I'm just going to be on the laptop and you guys are going to be in the field, and that never lasts long. She always ends up in the field again, putting herself into terrible danger. So that's just, I guess that's more of a thing to pay attention to than a statement for now.
Yeah.
So speaking of the dog, she orders Bentley to attack one of the clones, and then she shoots the other one. But the Gru uses his darkness to teleport her away before Tattletale can finish her off. And we see that this Gru has it, like his darkness does teleportation basically.
Yeah. I don't know if we talked about this before, but the idea of the clones having this slightly enhanced version of cape powers is not only really cool, but very thematically consistent to everything we've done before. Because if we assume that the idea with the evil clones is they're people's traumas and people's insecurities turned up to crazy levels, then it makes sense that their powers would be cranked up as well and changed as well. Because as we've said time and time again, trauma and the superpowers are inextricably linked. They're one and the same. They feed off each other. So that makes sense. And it of course, it's like, it's a fun, interesting twist on powers, but something that again makes sense within the context of the story.
Yeah. And we also have this notion that the passengers on some level are rewarding, either rewarding or giving some kind of reinforcement to either being in bad situations or being in situations similar to the trigger event. And these clones are basically in the worst possible frame of mind all the time. So yeah, that makes sense. So yeah, Skitter can sense Miss Militia leading a squadron of capes into the base at this point, and Shatterbird shows up just as Miss Militia opens the door, and Tattletale tries to shout for Miss Militia to shut the door, but it's too late. Shatterbird gets her scream off.
Shatterbird. Maybe we shouldn't have kidnapped her and just left her in their base the entire time. Maybe not. That
was almost a Chekhov's gun that was sitting there for so long that you forget about it, because like from the moment they capture Shatterbird, at least I was like, oh, this isn't going to go well. She's a weapon of mass destruction that they have on this leash. And like if Regent gets knocked on the head, she's free and is just going to kill everyone.
Right.
And
yeah, they were definitely playing with fire there. I mean, like it was only a matter of time. You're absolutely right. And of course, in classic Worm fashion, the time is the worst possible time.
Yep. Yeah. Exactly. So back in the dream, Taylor is surrounded by the 9 and Bakura and Panacea for good measure.
I am fascinated by the fact that Taylor puts herself in this situation where she is surrounded by all of her enemies, and she puts Amy on that list. Why do you think that is? That's very interesting.
Yeah, I'm not. I mean, the first thing that jumps to mind is just that she was in that situation involving Jack and Bonesaw and Panacea and the sarcophagus. Be. But I agree that it's probably more complicated than that.
Well, because Knight is there as well, and Bakura is there as well. So it's not just simply replaying these events. It's just we're bringing all these other people into it as well, people that she's defeated, and it's just very, very interesting. And I couldn't quite crack, what does this say about her view of Panacea? It doesn't seem to be good.
Yeah, I mean, maybe she does view her as like an adversary on some important level that she doesn't consciously kind of think about.
Yeah,
I don't know. It's that you definitely notice that, and you're like, what does that mean? Yeah, it's cool. And someone grabs her at this point, but it's Weld, and she's slightly confused, and is telling him to run. Of course it's real Weld, and he's pulling her out of Echidna's stomach and carries her over his shoulder. And then the entire rest of the book takes place in this dream inside Echidna.
Super Mario 2.
Yeah.
Just all a dream. It's a deep cut for people.
Spoilers.
It's a deep cut.
Yeah.
The game's like 30 years old. It can't be spoilers anymore. No, I love this moment, Matt. I really do. Because like for a fraction of a second, you can kind of see Dream Taylor putting Weld on her list of opponents. Like she's surrounded by all these bad guys. So you see Weld and you're like, oh, is she seeing Weld as another bad guy that's attacking her? That's going to beat her up too? But no, Weld's there to rescue her. And her first reaction to seeing Weld is to tell him to run, to try to help him, to tell him to get away. And it's like so this is a wonderful hero moment for Weld as he like carves into Noelle and pulls Taylor out. But at the same time, you see like Taylor's initial reaction here is, Weld, run, get out of here, go. And it's just like, oh, you're good, Taylor. You're good.
Yeah, it's really a wonderful heroic moment for this character as he's literally digging around inside this monster. I mean, he does have a certain like degree of not immunity per se, because obviously she can still hurt him.
Yeah.
It's cool. So the two Skitters are giving the heroes hell, and Skitter can't commandeer the bugs from them, although they do sense her trying to. They also take the opportunity to tell Weld all the terrible things she did, including killing Calvert, just before Imp has a chance to shut up that Skitter with her knife.
Oops. By the way, we did that. And of course, this is all like perfect. We see Skitter literally attacking herself for all of her failures, attacking herself for all of her terrible choices, attacking herself for leaving people to die, for failing people, for killing people. It's everything that I wanted out of the idea of having a Skitter clone, of her just like confronting herself. It's almost as if like Echidna ate Taylor and pooped out like a physical manifestation of her compartmentalization, only like it can talk and therefore tell other people about all this stuff that she's struggling with on the inside.
Yeah, you could probably learn a lot about yourself by finding out what angle your clone chose to take in tearing apart your life.
Yeah. And it's because, of course, Taylor has been doing this internal conflict for the entirety of the book. She's been fighting with herself. And now we get to see it in the real world physically manifested. It's just a fun beat.
Yeah, I think it's always interesting, like how there's sort of a subtle moral equivalence that she's doing, where she'll mention something like, she'll say like, I carved out a man's eyes, and it's like, okay, you're talking about the time that you cut out the eyes of the Regenerator super monster cape who was trying to kill you, which he just healed back eventually.
Yeah,
and then you're equating that with shooting a man in the head when he was on his knees.
It's like she's such a complicated character, right? Because like in the time, she made that completely justifiable. Like when she cut out Lung's eyes, you and I were both like, oh, Jesus Christ, that's holy shit. But to Taylor in that beat was like, I have to do this. Like, it's okay because he's going to regenerate, blah, blah, blah. But then after the fact, she looks back and says, oh my God, I can't believe I cut out a guy's eyes. And it's like, well, what are you doing? Like it's this like she's a walking contradiction almost, and it makes her such an interesting character.
Yeah, definitely. Weld goes back and keeps digging around in Echidna for more people. We had this. I don't know if it's specifically highlighted to us, but like we know that Weld's power sort of puts him in this confusing place regarding the Manton effect, such that I think it might be safe to assume, don't quote me on this, it could be wrong, that Echidna can't really copy him due to his nature.
Yeah, I think
that's why he's able to do this safely.
Yeah. Have we confirmed exactly how his power is just ignoring the Manton effect? Like, I know we get a deep dive into the effect later in this section, but I don't recall if we've like confirmed how he or maybe Case 53s are specifically just ignoring this. Like, I don't think that's been confirmed for us, but I couldn't remember.
Okay.
I guess that's a tough question for you to answer.
Yeah, I mean,
I'm just going to say I don't think, and if people out there that are reading can answer that without spoiling anything for me, please do.
Yeah, I'm hoping that I didn't just spoil you. I'm going through my brain going like, wait a minute, do we know that he has?
We know that he ignores the Manton effect. Yeah, because one of my speculations is about how exactly.
Yeah, I think what we know is like his body counts as non-organic to powers that affect organic things, and his body counts as organic to things that affect non-organic things.
Yeah, that's correct.
It's just like a trick basically. But yeah, we don't know like why that is or how that happened or how that works exactly. We just know that that's the case.
Yeah. Okay.
All right.
Cool.
I'm not freaked out anymore. All right. The Tattletale tells Rachel to keep feeding her giant dogs to Echidna, and she does so, which is actually somewhat surprising. Skitter realizes that the dogs are getting stuck in Echidna, but Echidna is also getting stuck on them, which she directly connects to like how you can get Weld hung up by getting him stuck to metal things. So the extra mass that they're adding to her is actually hampering her in this situation.
Yeah, and it's a really clever plan of Tattletale's, but it's also like insanely risky and requires this like huge amount of faith in Lisa that Rachel has to extend, that putting her dogs intentionally in harm's way. And I think this is just a huge character moment for Rachel here, that she is willing to work along with Lisa enough and trust her enough to put her dogs in harm's way here, for this plan that she wasn't 100% sure on.
Yeah, right. That's what's kind of surprising is Lisa is normally not quite this fast and loose. Like you're exactly right, because in a few moments she kind of admits like, yeah, I don't really know what's going on. For all I know, she could just keep getting bigger and bigger, and so it's like, okay, so this was I mean, if anything, you're like testing your theory here by risking Rachel's dogs, which she knows better than to do. So yeah, it's really setting all this stuff up.
Yeah, well, and it is on that side, and then on the other side is that the Rachel has the trust in her to just say okay is kind of crazy. It's an evolution of her character.
Yeah, no, you're exactly right. So Skitter is sort of like useless because of the fact that she's feeling extremely sick, and she hypothesizes that this is because her body is harboring mutant strains of mold and bacteria now. That's
such a classic Taylor conclusion to reach, but it's a really fun little beat that I never even thought of. That of course, if Noelle is sucking everything else inside her, she's going to suck in bacteria and viruses as well. Yeah.
Yeah, it reminds me of how her skin was prickling. That was the first manifestation of her power.
Yeah.
And it's like, I bet that was just microbes.
Yeah, you're probably right. Yeah.
Yeah. So Rachel bodily carries Skitter out of harm's way and helps her throw up.
I hope we don't get contact flagged for that, but it was worth it. It's a freaking totally bodyguard moment. God, I love these two characters so much.
Yeah. Yeah. It's very cinematic, the image. Not that you want to see someone throwing up, but like Rachel carrying her friend.
I just want everyone out there to know that I thought about just seeing that moment instead of pulling the clip, and I saved you all. So you're welcome.
Yes. I mean, it would have been great either way, Scott. So so Echidna spits some clones at them, including some dog clones, and these dog clones are normal size, even though they're twisted as usual. And then Rachel orders Bentley to kill the dog, and he does. He just crunches it fairly quickly, and then we get this moment of Rachel said, her voice low enough that only I heard it, feels wrong, which is of course a callback to when Taylor said that about killing the humans last arc.
Yeah. And I feel like sometimes we sound like broken records on here and talk about, I feel like every week I say, I love how Wildbow fits all this characterization stuff in places that we never would expect it. But here it is again, that it's a specific callback. It's wonderful. The idea that Rachel like seemingly had no problem killing any of the human clones, but now we're killing dog clones, and suddenly, it feels wrong.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's great.
Yeah. She's humanized the dog clones. What's the word for that? I'm sure there's a word.
Canonized.
Yeah. That works on so many levels. So Tattletale explains that the dogs are normal dogs surrounded in dead flesh, like zombie dogs, basically. So that's why the dead flesh stuck to Echidna. But then when she produced the clones, they were only normal dogs, which makes perfect sense and is in line with what we've been led to believe about Rachel's power.
Yep.
Once again, this is an example of Wildbow having fleshed out the world enough that you can just do things like this and have them make sense and not have to explain them in too much detail.
Yep.
So then Weld digs out Gru also and another dog, and he goes back for more. Echidna is finally incorporating all the dog flesh into her mass, and she's like 3 times bigger now, and she starts vomiting out tons of clones. And Miss Militia guns them down indiscriminately and then finishes them off with a flamethrower.
Oh my god.
And finally Weld gets everyone free and the good guys retreat.
It's a victory. Sort of.
Yeah.
Sort of.
Yeah, and then in the hallway, of course, Clockblocker and Kid Win, our 2 favorite people, are like badly lacerated and bleeding everywhere due to Shatterbird's power.
Yeah, I don't know about you, but like out of everything we've seen so far in this fight, this part is the one that hit me the hardest, because it's like at this moment you're like, oh god, Clockblocker and Kid Win like could die here. We've seen what the glass does to people and how much it hurts them, and they weren't even in the fight. They were just running down the hallway, and then like they got screwed and could die. And you're like, I don't think they're going to, but it's just this beat hit me harder than I thought it would. And I want to talk about, like, we kind of aired away from a little bit, but like how much are the Undersiders responsible for that in this moment? Because like it's Shatterbird's fault. Like Shatterbird did this, but they kept her, they kidnapped and used her. They had her in this cell where they brought Noelle to. So like, don't they own some of the responsibility for this here? Or am I being a little too critical?
I mean, it's interesting because it's not something that occurred to me, but I think you're not being too critical, because like you can imagine like this could have been much worse, and indeed it could become much worse in terms of what Shatterbird could do if free. And it's like, yeah, they absolutely had the chance to put her to send her to the birdcage, to just execute her, to solve the problem, basically, to solve the problem of this psycho with this incredibly destructive power and a desire to use it. And instead they were like, including Taylor, were like, oh no, we need the firepower.
Yeah.
And they even had conversations where, like I said earlier, like if Regent gets knocked unconscious, which is something that could totally happen in a fight,
right? Yeah.
Everyone's screwed, and they had this risk running the whole time. So yeah, I think they're totally culpable for any damage that Shatterbird does at this point. Honestly, I do. Like, yes, Shatterbird did this attack, but like she shouldn't have been here at all.
Yeah. I think that's fair. And I don't know if we're going to get some disagreement among people, but yeah, I think when you take that person and you use them and bend them towards your will, then their actions from that point on have some responsibility over them.
Yeah, sure.
For sure.
I mean, I don't think it's a stretch, because like the terrifying thing is that Taylor is the most ethical of the Undersiders. And we know that ethically she's severely compromised.
Yeah.
So that's the level of like thinking through these types of concerns that we're getting from this group of violent-minded teenagers. So yeah. So Echidna is now enormous. Her movements shake the structure as she moves through it, but she's too big to get out through the door now. So the Undersiders are dragged outside and propped up against a wall, while Echidna is kind of struggling to get out. Vista is still unaccounted for, and Tattletale knows that the teleporting Gru is still inside and can probably help Noelle get out. So Tattletale is going to detonate the whole base on top of Echidna and potentially on top of Vista. And Miss Militia stops her from doing it. I'm not going to read this whole interaction, but basically Tattletale is once Miss Militia takes the phone, is saying, you can finish putting in the code or you can give it to me. And that way, if Vista's still in there, your conscience is less muddy, if not exactly clear. And Miss Militia kind of thinks it through and realizes that Shadowbird's also in there. And she says, I won't have a clear conscience no matter what I do, Miss Militia said, but I might as well own up to it. And then she finishes the code, and the building is the building above the base is demolished, and then it collapses downward, and then the base itself is detonated, which then caves it in, and we end up with just a depression where this building used to be. And as Miss Militia has the whole crater foamed over, Tattletale guesses, presumably using her power, that they have about an hour until Noelle gets out, and that she hopes the threat level will be upgraded now.
Yeah, which of course we see that it is. Yep. But this Miss Militia beat is a start of a kind of a thing that carries through the rest of the section, in that we see people taking specific responsibility for their actions. And I think this is perhaps, in my opinion, one of the most heroic moments we've seen Miss Militia have. Not because she's saving people, not because she's unquestionably doing the right thing here. No, she's playing in this world of gray that everyone else is, but she makes this choice and she owns up to it, and she takes responsibility for it and all the consequences of it. And she takes that all on herself, and she says, this is mine. I'm going to do it. No, I'm not going to let you, I'm not going to give Tattletale gives me an out. I'm not going to take it. I'm going to do this. I'm going to take this on myself. And this is something that's echoed here with Taylor in a bit. And I think that's important and intentional.
Yeah, I think we're seeing a lot of maturity. Like, this is a much more mature way of dealing with the types of bad things. Because Taylor, she's not dealing with the bad things that she has to do. There are times when she has to do bad things to, so for example, if you think about like when she had to play dead, so that Mannequin left her alone, and then he like went after other people, that wasn't the same thing as like attacking Triumph and almost killing him. That was just like, oh, I have to make this terrible, painful sacrifice in order to actually do good. And that's the kind of thing that she like never lets go and will always feel bad about. She feels bad about all of the bad things she's done, including the things that were like very justifiable. But Miss Militia, I think, is probably, she's older, and I think she has this healthier understanding of like what it's like to have to grapple with these decisions. So she's a lot more sober, I guess, and aware of the decision she's making as she makes it. I think that's a great thing to highlight.
Yeah, absolutely.
So we get this little moment, which we're going to get more of in a bit, where Gru does not appear to be doing well. He's just kind of leaning against the wall listlessly, and he's basically just terrified and traumatized and kind of repeating himself.
Yeah, can we get Jessica Yamada in here? Anyone? Is she on call? We just get her over here.
Yeah, I mean, I wish. So yeah, as Skitter looks for somebody to help, she notices Weld and Miss Militia chatting about Thomas Calvert.
Uh-oh.
So yeah, so let's just move right on to 19.2.
Yep.
We pick right up. Skitter struggles to her feet, cloaking herself in bugs to go speak to the heroes. So she's literally like, she's feeling insecure about like seeming weak and covered in vomit and injured. So she literally covers her insecurity with like a cloak of bugs.
What a normal, healthy thing for a person to do. Jessica.
So as she walks there, she feels like she's at school, and her presence is repelling people. And you're kind of like, no, Taylor, I'm sure you're imagining it.
Yeah, it's a fun little subversion of what we just saw in Taylor's dream, where everyone was just ignoring her, and now everyone's paying attention to her. And we see actually Taylor grab onto that specific juxtaposition, in fact. And part of me kind of wishes that maybe this wasn't so explicitly called out, that like, basically we have Taylor tell us exactly how we're supposed to feel and how this is different from school Taylor, but kind of also the same. And I don't know, maybe this is a really minor complaint that maybe we didn't need to just directly call it out and spell it out. But
it's interesting that she's aware of it at all, though, because I always think back to like when Arc 8 in Tattletale's POV, when she's thinking to herself like, it's so strange how Skitter is always unaware of the fact that people are like staring at her out of the corner of their eye, because she's covering the whole environment with bugs. And Taylor indeed rarely ever pays attention to this fact. And here she actually notices people are like shying away from her.
Yeah.
Which is either, I don't know, it could just be because she's primed to notice it because of the experience she just had.
I think that's probably it, that she's reeling from reliving all these traumatic experiences, and so suddenly she's more observant towards how people feel towards her than she has been in the past.
Yeah, no, she needs to put that right back in the compartment.
oh, I'm sure it'll go in there, just not right now.
Yeah, and she does think to herself in analyzing it. A part of me wondered how much of that was my reputation beyond Bracton Bay and how much was my innate creepiness.
It's both. It's both, Taylor. You surrounded yourself in a bug cloak.
So she thanks Weld for the rescue, and he says Imp was the one who brought him in, and I have a hard time not quoting the whole exchange that follows. Catastrophic was the word Imp used, Weld said, when describing just what might happen if a clone got your power without any of your restraint, not to mention the issues posed by the psychotic grooves. Your clones could commit mass murder on the scale of hundreds, and his threatened to lose us the battle.
Yeah, this is a good beat, you're right. And it's, of course, absolutely true, because now I'm imagining evil clone Skitter like driving around the U.S. randomly killing people like Taylor hypothesized about doing a few weeks ago. And now suddenly we have the potential for it actually to happen. And we know that she can go into lungs with her bugs and rip arteries open, and can do that on a macro scale if she wanted to. Jesus.
Yeah. Right, yeah. So, yeah, Miss Militia admits that clones with her own power would also be pretty bad. And the rest of this exchange where Taylor says, I take it I have one of the tame powers? No, Miss Militia said, I wouldn't say that. There was a pause in the conversation.
Yeah, and maybe I'm reading too much into this here, but this feels like Wildbow talking about some of the commentary about his work. Because I remember when you and me, the first episode of this podcast, I specifically said that Taylor's power doesn't feel like it would be that dangerous, which of course is not true at all. And so I wonder if Wildbow is kind of taking the Miss Militia position in this exchange and like saying to people that thought this, that like, oh, bug powers don't seem like they would be all that bad, and saying, no, when I wrote these powers, like I always thought that they would be the opposite of tame. And maybe he was kind of surprised that people didn't think that or something. I don't know. That's me reading into a lot of stuff, but that's fun in my head. So yeah,
that makes quite a bit of sense. I mean, I think Taylor also doesn't really realize like Taylor from Arc 1 and Apocalypse level Taylor with swarm clones and constantly covered in bugs and using them as diversions and killing people with them are two very different points on the continuum. And so you'd be forgiven for not realizing what she's capable of in Arc 1, because she's also not aware of what she's capable of.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah. But yeah, I like your idea that this is some meta text. So she decides that she doesn't want to live in a story where people don't tell each other things. And basically having avoidable disasters because people won't talk to each other. So she decides to just open up and tell them that Calvert was Coil, and she fully explains what Coil was doing and basically admits that she killed him without actually saying those words. And then she tries to persuade Miss Militia not to tell her bosses about it because she thinks that Eidolon is in on it. And Miss Militia isn't really buying it because she basically thinks Cauldron is a hoax, and she suspects that Skitter is playing her.
Yeah, this whole conversation is so great. Skitter's rant about poorly written rom-coms with manufactured conflict, just because people refuse to sit down and talk to each other. This is like someone's like in my brain, because I hate that kind of manufactured conflict. And it feels like here again, I think I see Wildbow coming through the page a little bit. Like I think it makes sense that Taylor feels this way, but I just get the feeling that Wildbow hates that kind of conflict as well. And of course I fully agree with it. Absolutely.
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting because there is a completely legitimate reason not to tell the heroes that you murdered, their boss. But so this is, in addition to being like a relief that we didn't decide to go down that track storytelling wise and like meta wise, it's also a nice bit of Taylor being like the good parts of herself, the almost naive in a good way, like when Flechette accuses her of being naive. It's like, yeah, I mean, this is sort of a naive, dare I say, Ned Stark move, where it's like, look, I'm just gonna lay all my cards on the table, and I trust in the nature of people to do the right thing, which is quite I'll say it again, naive.
Yeah. Well, and to echo Miss Militia's beat from earlier on, this is Taylor taking responsibility for her actions. Weld gives her an out. Weld basically says, like it could be possible that the clones were lying to try to manipulate us because you do that all the time, which is a funny little beat on its own. But she doesn't take it. She doesn't take that out that she's given, and she takes responsibility. She comes clean. She tells them everything. And it's refreshing. And I think in this moment, we're supposed to draw this connection between Miss Militia just doing it a few moments ago to Taylor doing it now. Because Miss Militia is, from the PRT side, like we've seen so many of these people that have been corrupted and bad, like the whole Triumvirate, Arms Master. But Miss Militia, so far, is this character who really seems to represent like the best that the Protectorate could be. The potential of them. Like, we see that she's willing to work with Taylor at moments. She's not totally hard and rigid, but she's not like corrupted either. So like, to draw a comparison between these two characters at these moments is so intentional to me. And I think it's showing, at least on some level, a little bit of growth in Taylor.
Yeah, Miss Militia feels to me like one of our Ward's characters who grew up,
Right. Yeah.
There's a continuity of that ethos of like, I'm trying to do the right thing and I'm burdened down by this system, but I'm still going to try to do the right thing.
Yeah.
So there's this beat here between Weld and Taylor where they're talking about secret identities, and it's just planting the seed for what's going to come in a little bit, because what Weld says, it's something I'm interested in. I never had the benefit of a secret identity. Overrated as far as I can tell, I told him.
Yeah, and like we've talked about so many times, you can do two things in one beat. So you're right, we plant the seed for Weld and his interest in the Case 53s, the truth behind all that. But then we also have this beat with Taylor talking about, because we said a few arcs ago that I thought that Taylor was dead and Skitter had taken over, that Skitter was her identity now. And this kind of ties into that, how like she doesn't even have two identities anymore. She's just Skitter now. And
yeah,
like it's funny that this beat happens right after a moment where I just said that I feel like Taylor's grown some, because this feels like, okay, she's grown in some ways and not so much in others.
Yeah, right. It's always an exploratory process with her. So in the end, Miss Militia seems vexed that she has to be so paranoid, that she kind of almost like apologizes for having to be this way, and because it's not in her nature, but she has to be careful to protect her people.
Yeah, and this is why I like Miss Melissa so much, because you understand her in this moment. I think you really do. Like the stuff that she's being told is kind of crazy from the outside perspective, like briefcases and formulas and Coil being the head of the PRT and you didn't even notice. And when you're in this organization, when you're trusting this organization and been part of it for so long, like being told that it's like completely and thoroughly corrupted is probably pretty hard to process and believe. So you can understand why in this moment Miss Militia like has a lot of trouble with this, and even though she kind of wants to trust Taylor here, she has to be paranoid.
Yeah, that's a good point, that it's almost like intrinsically, it's like if someone came to like a police detective and were like, you're the chief of police is actually also the mafia kingpin.
Yeah,
you'd just
right.
be like, yeah, right. Okay.
Yeah. But my favorite moment in all this is when Skitter, as she's walking away, turns back and says, being in charge is hard. And this beat lands again, I think, because we've already spent the time to link these two characters and their choices to take responsibility for actions and be that leader's role and take responsibility when it's called for it, sort of stepping up. And now we have this little beat here where they acknowledge each other as the leader of their separate groups and how much of a burden that leadership actually is on them. And it's this like mutual respect beat that I just love so much. And it makes me think like in a different world, maybe they would just work really well together on the same team. But I don't know if we'll ever get that.
Yeah. I'm trying to think through how long has Taylor been in charge, like officially. Not that long, but I guess she's already had to make some hard decisions, and some bad things have happened as a result of her decisions. So she's not talking out of her ass here. I was like, can she really say that? But it's like, yeah, actually, I think she can.
Because even if she hasn't been formally in charge, I think she's been in charge of the Undersiders for a long time.
Yeah, I think you're right. So yeah, Tattletale kind of swoops in and borrows Skitter, and they walk off. And Tattletale flanks Skitter like a pace back, giving a subtle impression that Skitter is the one in charge.
Yeah, it's a really cool moment, and it's even more improved by the fact that Taylor is aware of it and then comments on how scary Lisa can be. Not the same as me scary, but a different kind of scary.
Yeah.
And we're drawing this beat out because, again, this is a Lisa heavy arc, and it's her plan that has led us here, and it's her crazy plan that's going to drive the story forward from here. And we've already had this beat where we reminded everyone that how secretive she is and how she keeps stuff even from her closest friends. And now we have a beat where her closest friend comments on how scary she can be and how she's like subtly able to manipulate things to change people's perspectives without anyone really noticing this. And again, we're just laying track for Tattletale's weird behavior going forward.
Yeah, that's interesting that she thinks of her as scary here. There's a few more moments in this arc where people specifically think of Tattletale and how scary she is, which is something that has been played on for the whole story, really, but it's definitely being emphasized here.
Yeah, absolutely.
So yes, she takes Skitter to meet Scapegoat, and he's a healer, sort of, with a really kind of interesting twist on that concept. I really like the idea of his power. And I think he's one of the only healers we've met other than Panacea.
There was that one guy that worked for the Nazi group.
But I think Othala. Yeah. You're right about that. Yeah. So Scapegoat has this healing, which is like fragile in some sense, where you get better, but the injuries come back, and then they're slower to heal if you don't adhere to certain conditions for a certain duration. So Tattletale then gives us this deep explanation for the power, which is the first of many power kind of digressions we're going to get in this arc. Scapegoat digs through parallel quantum realities to find unhurt versions of Skitter, and then swaps in pieces until they fit seamlessly. So based on the theory of how Star Trek transporters work, this means Taylor is now dead and has been replaced by a copy.
You just broke my brain. But isn't it cool here, Matt, how clever Wildbow's being here? Because in a few chapters, we're going to have Tattletale talk to us about multiple dimensions and how every time they use their power, they're tapping into these other dimensions. But we're spending the time here to lay the groundwork for that idea. So we establish a new character who accesses other dimensions to remind our audience that is a thing that exists in this world. So when Tattletale eventually reveals it, it's not totally outlandish. But and again, this is the kind of setup that Wildbow does so well. And it's why the events of the book rarely feel completely out of left field or totally outlandish. Because if something new happens, there's always some tiny beat that established the possibility of that thing happening in the story at some point. And I know we've said this multiple times in this episode, but I really want to hit this because it's so well done, and it's why you feel like the world is real and lived in.
Yeah. I mean, I think the reason we're mentioning that so much today is that this arc utilizes that quality of the work a lot. So
yeah, and it's especially important in stories like this one, which are sci-fi or fantasy in nature, which take place in a world different from ours, where you have to clearly define these rules because they're not our rules. It's really good. Yeah,
I guess I have some comments more about this, but I'll save them for when we get to more power discussions. So
okay.
So Scapegoat's process of healing ends, and Skitter finds that she can see, and immediately we get she's fucking blind. Scapegoat yelped, which is the best moment ever.
It really is. It's a great way to reveal how Scapegoat's power works, but also we use it as a character moment to learn about him and his personality a little bit, because he's like this guy who is exhausted by its power. Like, it's so useful, but it sucks for him so much. Yeah. And you get a really good idea of who he is as a person in just that one little line.
Yeah, I love this like Dolores Ed type, like, and he's like, I hate my power, I hate my power.
It's so great.
Yeah. So yeah, but like you said, he's taken on all of her injuries in some form or another, and he's complaining. But Tattletale mentions that she's paying him well, and Skitter wonders about this since she seems to be paying an awful lot of people an awful lot of money right now.
Yeah, and we're hitting those Tattletale beats. Like, already we have Taylor's concerns about the money. We also know that she just like pledged to give a shit ton of money to Fault Line's crew, millions of dollars for them to come to Brockton Bay and help out. So like, we're getting this feeling that Lisa might be just stretched a little too thin. She's trying to do too many things. She's trying to juggle so many different things, and she's maybe spending money she doesn't even have anymore. And like, we forget kind of that Lisa has been through just as much as everyone else, because she's so guarded and secretive about like what she's going through, and she does such a good job of hiding it. But she's like gone through a whole lot of shit, and seemingly we haven't really seen the effect of that. So maybe we're seeming to get like this weirdness in her behavior, and maybe that's what it's linked to.
Yeah. So yeah, she Skitter starts to stand up off the ground from being healed, but Tattletale stops her, and she says, treat yourself like you're made of glass. No heavy exertion. Don't get hurt. Don't strain yourself. And it's possible that I'm reading too much into this, but having Lisa literally say, treat yourself like you're made of glass, really just fits in too well with our running study of how Tattletale treats and thinks of Taylor.
Yeah, and it may or may not be intentional here, but it absolutely does fit that. It's perfect. She's always been super protective of Taylor, and this is a physical manifestation of that overprotective nature.
Yeah. So they return to the other Undersiders. Gru, who Taylor first wanted to get help for and then completely forgot about, is basically unresponsive and like flinching when people touch him, and like pulling his hand away when you try to take his hand. And we're reminded that you see variations of your trigger event and other traumatic events inside Echidna. So Skitter ultimately, after kind of thinking about it, and how she wants to go with him, but she also kind of wants to be here. So she tells Imp to take him home.
Yeah, this is a really, really powerful moment. And as much as is powerful for Gru, the part I really loved was this interaction between Imp and Taylor here. Imp has been growing up a lot since we first met her. I remember the first time we saw her, she was the girl who gave Taylor shit and threatened to expose her powers to everyone in the middle of this apartment as the Child Protective Services person was there. And suddenly now we see this girl who, at the end of the day, respects Taylor's decision, who's given it out. Taylor basically says, I'll go if you really want me to, but chooses to take responsibility again and take care of her brother. And it is this really adult decision that we see in her. And there's kind of some lasting tension between the two. They both like stare at each other's goggles because they can't actually see each other's eyes, but they look each other in the eye for a long time before the beat ends. And there's some lingering tension there maybe, but like it was a really great moment.
Yeah. I can't say anything more than that other than that I completely agree that this was kind of harrowing, and like tactically it removes two of your strong, fighters from the picture, but that's not what you're thinking about. You're thinking about, the sadness of this moment.
Yeah. And that's a big deal for Taylor too, to willingly give up tools in her toolbox.
Yeah. Right.
But there's a part here that I wanted to ask you about, because like she's thinking about how she doesn't want to leave. She does want to leave. She wants to go with Brian. She wants to just hold him and help him. But then in this moment, she flashes back to the vision of helping Mannequin and the people she cared about struggling to get to safety and how she failed them. And then remembering that was reassuring to her in this moment, which was kind of weird. I mean, what was your take on that?
I was thinking about this. I don't really have anything smart to say here, honestly. Like it's it's like, I guess that situation ended up kind of okay, even though she feels like she let herself down, or maybe that she's been in this situation before in some form. I really don't know.
My take on it, and I don't know if this is right, is that she's struggling with these two choices. She's struggling with, do I go with Gru and do I help Gru, or do I go and help all the other people? That if we put Noelle in the role of mannequin in this moment, that Noelle is going to be rampaging and hurting people. And so the reassuring is not like, I was reassured by the fact that I was failing people. It's remembering how bad I felt when I failed to help other people when they were being attacked by this evil cape, reassured me in my decision. It focused me on what I need to do, which was stay here and fight. And that's what I got from it. But that could be right or wrong. I don't know.
Yeah, that fits. That makes sense to me. Yeah, I'll go with that.
Okay.
Yeah. So the two sibling Undersiders leave, and Skitter notices the remainder of the Triumvirate plus Meriden and Chevalier. So I think we decided it's Chevalier, even though I always want to say it Chevalier. So I'm probably going to slip back and forth anyway.
I think it's fine.
As they approach, Skitter notices a smile spreading on Tattletale's face. I felt a moment of trepidation. I'd seen that kind of smile. I'd seen it on Emma's face often enough just before she pulled something. It wasn't directed at me, though. I reached out for Tattletale's arm, but she was already speaking. Cauldron, she said, the word just loud enough for the heroes to hear. And from their reactions, she's using her power against the information she's after, that all three of the Triumvirate know about it and are in on it. Man,
what a great beat. Not only does this line up with everything we've been setting up for Lisa so far throughout the arc, but the fact that this reminds Taylor of Emma in this moment is like, is so wonderful. Like, it's like, if you had any doubt that we're supposed to be seriously concerned about what Lisa is doing and the way Lisa is behaving so far, comparing her to Taylor's bully is like, seals the deal. Like, it's like, yes, you reader are supposed to be like, holy shit, what's going on with Lisa right now? It's so great. It's such a brilliant way to do it.
Yeah, and I think she's compared her to Emma in the past, actually. Or
I think you're right. Yeah.
But like, yeah, it's definitely the fact that it's coming here. I also just want to emphasize like the ballsiness of this and the recklessness of it. Like it's like if you were in a DC story where nobody knew about kryptonite and its like effectiveness, and some like weak, teenage girl with very mild powers like within earshot of Superman were like, kryptonite, just to see how he reacted. Like, it'd be like, that's yeah. It's crazy. Yeah. And it's only the beginning too. Like, she keeps doubling down on this recklessness. It just, oh man. Yeah. And now for a word from our sponsors. Hey everyone, it's Bob again. Fugly Bob, times have been pretty tough. You remember that burger stand in Weymouth Shopping Center? Well, some little girl turned it into a fucking gargoyle. Yeah, wings and all. So we've relocated again. I dug down deep into my savings and I spent it all. I've made the finest Fugly Bobs this city has ever seen. Brand new grills, seating for 200 people, 2-story floor-to-ceiling windows, marble floors. Marble. We've got it all. Bob is back, baby, and Brockton Bay is coming with him. So come on down to Fugly Bob's and try our back in business special. A fugly-sized Bob special with fries and a... Shattered bird! What? What was that? Shattered bird! Shatter? Oh, God. Oh, no. Oh, God. Don't do this to me. I was back. Bob was back. Fugly Bob's. Look for the large pile of shattered glass and condiment bins on the corner of Main and Deacon. And we're back. So we move into 19.3, and Skitter is irritated with Tattletale for making this move, blurting out the information about Cauldron with no clear gain in mind, at least none that Tattletale has told Skitter about at this point. So they argue, but Tattletale kind of shuts it down by saying to trust her a little.
Yeah, and I'm on Taylor's side here. That while this was a really fun reveal, it doesn't seemingly serve any purpose that we can see right now. And I think it's really interesting that we see how Tattletale goes out of her way to project Skitter as the leader of the group, but she's continually making decisions unilaterally without looping in her boss. She's just deciding to do these things, and when her boss tells her no, stop, she's just like, no, just trust me. I got this. It's really interesting.
Yeah, and it's like on some level you're like, why? Like speaking for Skitter, like why should I trust you? Why don't you just tell me what you're up to? And I guess we get the moment later where she's like, I will tell you. I want it to be an awesome Murder, She Wrote moment when I do tell you.
Yeah.
Which is not entirely mature.
It's insane.
Yeah. So yeah, it turns out that Wanton survived the radiation dose, but Raymancer probably won't make it. So Skitter tries to get Tecton's head back in the game after kind of having this sad thing happen. And she also kind of mentally to herself thinks that he's naive for trusting that Murden might be able to help Raymancer.
Yeah, and this is our start of getting into the part of the story where Taylor like is seemingly bewildered by teams that operate, normally, like chain of command, mutual trust. What are these foreign things? I've never heard of these. Right.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, we'll see that.
Yeah, that'll carry forward. Yeah, in a little bit.
So Regent can't get a bead on Shatterbird, so she's either dead, out of range, or inside Noelle.
And of course, this is Worm, so it's definitely one of the latter two.
So Skitter wants to go retrieve Atlas, and Tattletale wants to go talk to Scrub and the Travelers. So they do the second errand. They find the Travelers foamed to the road, and they're being guarded by the San Diego wards, which includes a giant Case-53 named Gully and two others who I don't know if we get their names. And when Gully and Tecton are talking, and there's this like sense of camaraderie between them and friendly back and forth, and then Tecton tells her about Raymancer, and Gully kind of offers like some genuine sympathy, and Taylor thinks sympathy could be a horrible thing to give someone depending on who they were and how far along they were in their acceptance of the event. And then she thinks about how with something to distract myself, I could deal. I'd compartmentalize, refocus, focus on getting the job done. But a few touching words, that would make me lose my composure is basically what she's saying. And this is something you pointed out when you were doing your live tweet. But it's like, yeah, you wouldn't want somebody to mess up your delicate compartmentalization process, Taylor.
Yeah. How dare they? How dare they do that? And I mean, it is true that sometimes someone showing you sympathy just does make you feel terrible, but that whole thing is dependent on the idea that losing your composure and feeling feelings is a bad thing, which is what Taylor seems to think here. It's like this is bad. I can't feel things. I need to avoid this. I don't have sympathy on me. Don't actually care about how I'm doing, teammates. Thank God I don't have any of those people on my team. It's like, oh God, Taylor.
Right. Yeah. She's just like, thinks she can keep it bottled up forever, basically.
Yep. Where's Jessica? Jessica.
So yeah, she's noticing this genuine camaraderie, and she's actually thinking like, I wonder if this is what it would have been like if I joined the wards.
Yeah, and you know what? Until we saw that kind of camaraderie through Taylor's eyes, I hadn't fully realized that this is something that the Undersiders just don't really have. They're definitely a team. They look out for each other. They work well together. They interact like well together in a strategic sense. But we don't see like very often like genuine like either concern or happiness. Like there's a moment in here where like I think it's Gully that gets like temporarily promoted because the leader of the wards it didn't come, and like Tecton is like excited for her or something. Or maybe it's the exact opposite. But there's like they're genuinely happy for each other because they're advancing in the ranks. And this is just like not the kind of conversations that happen in the Undersiders at all.
Yeah. I think it basically pre-Leviathan was the last time there was anything like this. Like I remember they had their nice day shopping on the shopping district, which is now completely destroyed. And they've just been like trying to not get killed ever since then.
Yeah. I mean, when's the last time Taylor called these people her friends? Like, I can't remember. I can't remember.
Yeah, they're her teammates,
right.
and they were her friends, and she did think about them as her friends, and she was like really happy that like when Lisa and Brian were at her house and her dad saw her like, you know, in a pile with them, and it was like, oh, I'm so happy I have friends. It's like, no, that's not a priority.
Right.
You just gotta save Dinah and protect your people,
and it's so crazy because like getting these friends and not wanting to lose these friends was the entire purpose of her, at least in her mind, of changing her mind and not betraying the Undersiders and not becoming a hero and turning on them, was because I like these friends and I want to hang out with these people more. And it's just like, you forget that we're so far removed from that world now that like she doesn't think about that anymore. I really wonder if we look back in detail and see when the last time she called an Undersider her friend. I'm really curious about it.
Yeah.
It was probably Rachel. It was probably like Rachel when she was trying to like convince her not to hate her anymore.
Yeah, no, I think you're right. That's almost certainly right. Yeah. So yeah, they're talking to Ballistic, and it turns out that Ballistic and Sundancer were both pretty badly injured when Trickster kept repeatedly teleporting them into the sky and dropping them.
Oh, Kraus. you really went full in now, huh? Just gonna commit to your terrible wrong decision.
Yep. That's him. That's our bud. Tattletale tries to talk to Scrub, but he's not responding. I'm not sure why exactly he's not responding.
Yeah, this felt that beat confused me a little bit because we've heard him talk before. Yeah. Right when he got his powers, he talked.
When he got his powers, yeah. I wasn't sure what that was about. I mean, I think we may find out, but I don't remember. So she waits around to see the effect of his power on surfaces. And we get that moment where Taylor's like, okay, what is this about? And she's like, can't you just play along? I love these Murder She Wrote moments where I can pull everything together, pull everyone together, then dish the info. Everything makes sense. The puzzle pieces fall together and things start falling into place. We lose all the effect if I reveal some of it early.
Matt, we're on a clock. Like Noelle is coming. Like it's not like they're just like hanging out in the city. Like life or death scenario is happening, and Lisa is just like seemingly playing games and having fun, and it's so weird and off-putting, and like you're just kind of flabbergasted.
Yeah, I know. It's moments like this you're like, wait a minute, how much of her like grinning all the time is her putting up a facade, and how much is just her being unhinged?
Yeah.
So yeah, finally Scrub, accidentally hits the road itself with his power, and Tattletale asks Gully to use her power to lift the affected section out of the ground, and Tattletale shows how the sphere that was affected by the power has been transplanted somehow with a similar but not quite identical material. And then she goes on to explain some stuff about passengers and dimensions and the Manton effect, and she's basically explaining something about how the powers tend to work by moving stuff or energy between dimensions. So she's talking about Sundancer, and she's saying when Sundancer superheats her immediate area, she's doing what Scrub does and shunting a roughly human-shaped patch of superheated hair and fire into a parallel Earth, shunting room temperature air into her immediate surroundings. And then Wanton asks, doesn't that mean that they'd be causing destruction on some hapless world? Good question, Tattletale grinned. Yes, probably. Could be that every time Sundancer's power protects herself, she's setting the approximate location of her Earth, her other Earth on fire. Nothing saying that other Earth is populated, but it could be.
I can't stop imagining a human-sized fireball appearing every time she uses her power, and just be people sitting on their couch watching TV, and then suddenly, what the fuck is happening? Yeah, but this is amazing, and I like. again, we've talked about how I don't get really into the nerdy sci-fi part of it, but thematically, the idea that just by using your powers, our characters are just like fucking killing people on some alternate Earth that they didn't know about, is just so thematically fulfilling with like themes and choices and everything we've been talking about. Consequences of your decisions that you can't see and aren't always clear just by using this power that you have. It's so wonderful. It's so thematically rich. I like it so much.
Yeah, right. It's like people have thought about maybe where the powers come from, but it's like potentially where the powers come from is so horrific that you don't even want to know.
Yeah, yeah. And of course, Tattletale says this with a grin on her face.
Right. Yeah, totally. So she also posits that the passengers might indeed be huge in order to do the kinds of things they need to do in terms of matter and energy manipulation and computation. Because you think of them as being like small, like fitting inside your head small, but there's no reason that's the case.
Yeah, which is something I think that we already kind of knew. Well, at least we knew that the big entities that split off into all these passengers were massive. So maybe it's all part of one big thing, is kind of what we're saying here. Yeah.
So Skitter's annoyed that Tattletale took them on this errand for no good tactical reason. So Tattletale adds like, oh yeah, and the reason we're actually talking about this is that I think Echidna has a broken or demented passenger that's missing some of the usual limitations, and maybe they can take advantage of it. And she also thinks that they can use. Yeah, right. And then of course the real reason, which is that she wants to use this knowledge to tear a hole between worlds.
What the fuck are you doing, Lisa? Like you have like, she's like just so reckless, so irrational, just like is so convinced that this path she's taking is the right one, and she's convinced herself that she's right, and it's just like, oh my god, like what a perfect way to end the chapter.
Yeah. And then we go to we take a break from that, let that simmer. And we go over to 19.x. Ray, aka Blasto, shows up at a meeting with our good friend Accord. So Ray's mask is like a fungus that looks like a normal face, but it's not his face. And Accord's mask is like an intricate contraption that conforms to kind of match his expression, which I think is interesting because they both have masks that conform to their faces, although they're like one is mechanical and one is organic. So it's like they're similar, but dark mirrors of each other.
Yeah, totally. Blasto. Yeah. Stupid name.
So we enter, and the building is full of Accord's signature immaculate style and other perfectly manicured capes in stylish costumes. It turns out that the Nazis destroyed Blasto's lab, and Accord will be bailing out Blasto in a sense, letting him find his feet, provided he stays completely out of Accord's way, and basically tries as hard as he can to just not exist.
Yeah, and I like Accord, and I know I was critical kind of that beat with Mars walking in and she has to die because she walked in a room, and I felt that was a little weird, but I do really find the character interesting, and I like him here, and I like that this kind of shows that we're not done with him yet. We're going to get more of him. Yeah.
So Accord takes him down to the basement to his new laboratory, and it's a dream. It's perfect. It's just the kind of thing that Accord would make, and Blasto immediately knows he's going to soil it. Accord mentions there are some special samples that Blasto would be interested in the computer, so he checks those out when Accord leaves. And among the data is a slightly degraded copy of the PRT database. I suppose we're meant to wonder if this is what the Undersiders stole, including an entry on Blasto himself. And we learn that apparently a kill order is pre-authorized if his creations are able to self-replicate.
Yeah, and a great character beat for Blasto is that he's aware already of that kill order. So he like stopped making his creations self-replicate, but he like kind of did it annoyingly. Like he's like, oh, fine, I won't do that anymore. And it's like, we're setting up this kind of mad scientist guy pretty early on.
Yeah. I like his character. I like how he's sketched out. So he doesn't get much insight into the Triumvirate in the database. Those entries are just not present. But he finds a wealth of details about Chevalier. And it triggers that special kind of tinker inspiration where he can see something in Chevalier's power that he can replicate in his own biotinker way via his own path. And then also included among the samples is a fragment of a Simurgh feather.
Yeah, it was about time, this time in the reading, where I started to freak the fuck out. Biotinkers are bad. Biotinkers are bad. We should not screw with them. They're evil. They shouldn't be them. They should just go away. No more. No.
No, you're wrong, Scott. It's all tinkers. So basically, Blasto is being like minded by a series of the ambassadors, which are Accord's gang. So this one, Citrine, engages him in conversation, and she seems alarmed at the idea that Blasto's first thought is to replicate an Endbringer, and this makes him realize that Accord might actually be planning to let him do that and then kill him and take his product.
Yeah, an Endbringer that he could control would certainly bring a order to the world, wouldn't it?
Indeed, especially Simurgh.
Yeah.
So he examines Simurgh's feather and Leviathan's blood and finds no actual cells present. It's more like crystals. So he starts growing one of his special cultures using the Simurgh tissue regardless, mixing it with some of Mirrodin's cells.
Yeah, so we see they're kind of not actually alive. They don't have cells, they're not living, they can't exist on their own just in that form. So they're weird.
Yeah.
More little tidbits of what these things are.
Yeah. And then he uses a monkey, some of his own cells, and one of his special seeds to make a lab assistant.
That's normal.
Yeah. And then he uses the lasers to label his projects, and he calls the abomination, the Simurgh abomination, the Morrigan.
Which is an Irish myth name, I think. Yeah,
it's like a goddess of war and fate, which I think the fate connection is especially useful.
Yeah.
Because it's the Simurgh. I wonder if it's related to like Morgan, who was the enemy of Merlin. So we have like a Mirrodin Morgan connection there.
Could be.
Yeah. So he's distracted by the TV, which is turned up. It turns out there's an attack in progress. The Slaughterhouse 9 are fighting dragon suits right there in Boston. But Blasto can't be bothered. He's doing tinker stuff. He turns his attention back to his projects as the ambassador capes leave, presumably to deal with the situation.
This interlude is like watching a car crash in slow motion. And you know it's coming and you're powerless to stop it. And then the Slaughterhouse 9 are there just to put icing on that delicious cake. Yep.
And it's funny because he's just so like, he's such a, stereotypical like tinker as we've been led to see them, that he's just like, he's like, all these interruptions. And then he, looks up and it's Bonesaw and a horribly modified damsel of distress traipsing downstairs amid mutilated ambassador corpses.
Mm-hmm.
And Bonesaw cheerfully questions him about his work. I like how like plucky he is though. He's like, this is Bonesaw, I'm dead. But he shows a lot of just like, hello, Bonesaw.
Yeah. I know you. Yeah.
Yeah. Right. And then Defiant shows up, quickly obliterates Damsel of Distress with the nanothorns.
I have never in my life been happier to see fucking Arm Master. But yeah, I also appreciate the little irony here of a former superhero killing someone called a damsel in distress. So he damseled her by murdering her.
She probably deserves it.
She absolutely did.
Yeah. So I wonder, like, tangent, but like I wonder if Defiant planned this out as like a trap, because Bonesaw is in this sealed lab where her epidemics can't get free, and that's where he chooses to attack. Yeah,
it certainly seems like it. Like, we've already established that Arms Master is pretty good at picking and choosing the best places for fights. He did it with Leviathan. He kind of like controlled the flow of the fight to go there, so it wouldn't surprise me.
Yeah, that's true. So it's funny, like, she keeps trying to talk to him throughout this fight, and he just like mercilessly presses the attacks. Like, the first thing he does is he nails her in the chest with his spear, and she swears. And then he batters her against the walls like a ragdoll, bludgeoning her. But of course, she's really durable.
Yeah, the swearing, I missed it the first time I read it. And then on my second read through, it really did jump out at me. And like, it leads to this moment where you think that Bonesaw is finally going to got here. Like, that she's really pushed up against a wall and is like, she's swearing. So like, this is serious and she might actually lose here. And Matt, it takes a lot to get me to cheer for the brutal death of a 12-year-old girl. But here we are.
Yeah.
Here we are.
Yeah. It's interesting. I always like to think about the purpose of this here, because it's really a character shift, perhaps.
Yeah.
So she tries to enlist Blasto's help, and she's like, hey, help me out here, or it's going to be bad for you. And he decides that he would honestly rather die if it helps to kill her.
Blasto, your name shall forever be enshrined in the cool people shrine for doing that. I need a better name for my shrine.
So she tries to use some various acids to get free of her stabbed location, and Defiant ends up cutting her almost in half, except for her armored spinal column. And then she uses some kind of powder-based substance that ends up kind of behaving like her own special form of containment foam to slow down Defiant. And then she crawls over to Blasto and climbs up him using her prehensile spine, which is prehensile, I'll add. And then he tries to activate the Morgan to help, but it doesn't work. It's not viable. And then Bonesaw shoves her spine down his throat and operates him like a puppet.
What the fuck? This is insane.
And then she uses him to walk over to the computer and gathers up the genetic samples from all the prior members of the Nine, while saying something about a cloning process and about Jack wanting to hurry the end of the world along.
Oh, great. This is good. It's good.
And then she stopped and turned toward the Morgan. He could feel his blood run cold. Nah, Bonesaw said. Even I'm not that crazy.
I never thought I'd be relieved. Anything to do with Bonesaw, but here we are.
Yeah. This is a surprising chapter.
Yeah, but of course, the implication of this is now we have samples of every single Endbringer, and she's going to clone them, or not Endbringer, sorry, member of the Nine, and she's going to clone them, and so every hard-earned victory against the Slaughterhouse Nine is just going to go away now, and we're just going to have more of them. Hooray.
Mm-hmm.
Hooray.
So Bonesaw escapes with poor Blasto, and we cut perspective to Defiant. Dragon is dissolving the goo that Bonesaw caked him with, and then they hold hands as they walk back to the mobile suits. They lost 2 suits, but they killed 4 of the 9, and as they reach the Uther, Colin realizes that one of the bodies is Manton.
Yeah, the Siberian is dead. So we have Siberian and Damsel in Distress. Was there any indication of what the other 2 members were? Presumably some new recruits, right? Because I can't think of who else would be left that we specifically know.
Yeah,
I mean, Jack's definitely not dead. Bonesaw's not dead.
Yeah, I think Hookwolf is the only person that jumps to mind. I feel like there's
could be him, but
another one that I'm
weird.
supposed to. Yeah, I don't think. I mean, I think we would have found out if it was. Honestly.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's probably the new recruits.
Yeah. So before we move on, I think we went through this interlude pretty fast. And I think the reason for that is because a lot of this is just kind of set up for a bunch of future ominous shit. But what I wanted to quickly talk about here at the end is we touched on this last week about Wildbow's ability to write horror. And that's kind of what this interlude is. But I think he's playing with expectations a lot here. And I think it's why this was so engaging for me. Because we open this interlude very slowly. And we spend like most of the word count of the chapter with Blasto as he does his various experiments. And we're slow into it. Like we follow him with the detail. And as he starts messing with an Endbringer and the growing and like the chopping off failed ones and forming it to the way. And we spend a lot of time with this stuff. And we're building tension as he's fucking with an Endbringer. And as like the rules of this kind of genre say that whenever the mad professor starts tinkering with this kind of stuff, he's going to lose control of his creations and be damned for it. That's what the genre kind of says. And you can tell that Wildbow knows that because it's just kind of a misdirect, because suddenly the 9 are here and then the tension ramps up and the pace ramps up, and we keep playing in horror. Like we're still in horror. Like Bonesaw is cut in half and uses her fucking prehensile spine to crawl up someone and shove into their mouth. It's crazy and Cronenbergian, but it's very different from where you think the chapter is going to go. And it impacted me way more than I thought it would. And I think it's like, because you seem to play in those genre tropes and then you subvert them in a little way. And it leads to moments where I just said, oh shit, several times while reading this section.
Yeah. I think you're right. There's definitely like there's like a first half and a second half, and the first half is more about that like atmosphere building, this sort of texture, and you walk in through this creepy, perfectly manicured supervillain lair with capes standing in like their perfect outfits with their perfectly oiled hair, and you go downstairs to this basement that's full of medical equipment, and he's like, casually creating these monstrosities and caught up in the flow of doing what he's doing, and that's its own like really interesting, almost like atmospheric tone poem part of the chapter, which, like you said, narratively is setting up certain expectations that are then subverted, and the second half is its own separate body horror thing. I really like this interlude. All right, and then we get back to our main characters. We return to our heroes with Scapegoat bemoaning how hilariously bad Brockton Bay is and how terrifying Tattletale is.
Yeah, this is more great Scapegoat characterization, and I'd argue that this would not have worked had we not laid the seats for that with that whole she was blind moment earlier in the section. There's something very like John McClane die-hardy to his complaints here to me. Like, I can just imagining him saying, "Come to the coast, we'll get together, have a few laughs." It's like, it's really wonderful. How is my Bruce Willis impression? Was it
pretty good?
Spot on?
Yeah, spot on. Yeah. No, I like that a lot. I mean, this is another, moment where it's important to get comic relief.
Yeah.
So she wants, Tattletale wants to use Scrub plus another cape whose power relies on other realities to tear a hole into another world. And she's Scapegoat could work too, but I think it'd take too long, and it might need a human sacrifice, having Scrub hit someone who was heavily affected by the goat's power. Regent nudged me. With Gru gone, it's your job to lay down the law. No human sacrifices. He'd mimic Gru's tone of voice with forced lowness. No human sacrifices? Did I really want to veto any possibilities when we were faced with threats like the Inbringers and Echidna?
So not only is this just another amazing Regent moment where you're just like, God, I love Alec. He's so great. But Taylor, Taylor.
Yeah. Hold on now.
Let's not take anything off the table. First of all, we don't like. Lisa's plan here is insane, and we know it's insane, and we don't even know if Taylor's buying into this plan yet, but she's so unwilling to remove sacrificing someone from the table, and it's just like, what are you doing?
Yeah, Jesus. Like I said, the moral center of the Undersiders right here is being called to account by Regent.
And Alec, he's making a joke here. He is, but the fact that he picked up on this and she didn't is pretty concerning. That our like sociopath who can't feel emotions is like, oh, the rest of my team would find this troublesome to be talking about human sacrifices, and then Taylor, like you said, our moral center goes, well, hold on,
right? It's
just like, oh my god.
Yeah. I mean, it almost stands by itself. You almost, I don't even want to like comment too much because it's like, yep, that's hilarious. Yeah. So, there's this moment where she's talking about the travelers being from another world, and I'm not sure, like, and this is a genuine question, like, how does she know that? Is it because they told her? Is it because Coral told her? Is it her using her power? Is she guessing it based on the fact that she strongly suspects that they took Cauldron vials? Does she think that they were Cauldron captives and not realize that they took the vials willingly? I mean, I'm not sure what we're supposed to believe about Tattletale's state of knowledge right here.
Yeah, and my guess here is that, it's Tattletale seems to be making a lot of logical leaps here, and just pulling information and then making conclusions based off of it, which is what she always does, but she's jumping around way more than she normally does. So yeah, I mean, I think it's very unclear how much she actually knows, and it's because I'm not even sure if she's very aware of how much she actually knows. So
yeah, because she says some things regarding the travelers that just kind of seem incorrect. So I'm like,
Yeah,
okay, is she actually wrong, and she's just kind of blurring the details for the benefit of the audience, or
I think her just being flat out wrong here is important, because I think she's behaving so irrationally and so recklessly that yeah, I mean, I think we're supposed to see, yeah, she's kind of wrong with some of this stuff. She's
we should be worried.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So yeah, Skitter then heads out with Rachel, Gully, Wanton, and Scapegoat to find Atlas. And we have this moment where she kind of realizes that they know from Dinah that there's a good chance a large portion of the city will be destroyed. And then she realizes that they don't actually know that that's going to be because of Echidna. It could very well be Tattletale's plan to knock this hole into another world that levels half the city. And we'll find out that Echidna was permanently trapped beneath the rubble and not even in consideration.
Yeah, and I think this is, again, the problem when you start like basing all of your plans off of the word of these very unclear precogs who don't have the full story. And like, we've seen Lisa again and again in this section of the book behave so strangely, and we've reinforced the negative sides of her behavior. We're talking about her acting recklessly. She's seemingly convinced herself that the things she sussed out with her powers are right, and has kind of forced everyone in the group to operate with that same line of thinking, that I am right here. But we know she's been wrong before. We know her power can lead her astray. We've seen it. And when she uses inaccurate information as a basis to gather more information, that information is inaccurate too. And she tends to go down this rabbit hole where she just like keeps feeding off of that and reinforcing that and getting more and more off base. And when I was thinking about this is the moment that I realized, Matt, who did she put in charge of pulling her back when she started behaving like that? Who was that?
Yeah, it was Gru, and I'm glad you're pointing that out, because I did not consciously notice, like, oh yeah, she sent away the person who she designated to be her minder.
Yeah. And it's interesting that, like, Taylor almost realizes this too, but when Taylor calls her out on it, she doesn't listen. It's only seemingly when Gru tells her, hey, you need to step back and you're kind of getting in your own head here, that she actually listens. But when Taylor says, well, I don't know, she's like, no, trust me, which is very interesting.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny that Alec just before this was in his own way noting, like, I bet if Gru were here, he would probably say something about this. But because Gru's not here, there's no restraining force on Taylor's like absolutism and Tattletale's willingness to go off the deep end.
Yeah.
So yeah, poor Gru who no one listens to, yet he still serves a vital function.
Yep. Poor guy.
Yeah. So Skitter, as they're driving to find Atlas, she actually passes out in the van because she's so tired. But she wakes up when her power finds Atlas. And once again, the wards are terrified by everything having to do with Skitter, as she caresses and then mounts her giant monstrous beetle. And it's very possible that she just failed to explain to any of these people what Atlas was. Yeah.
Like, can you imagine them in this situation? Like Wanton is totally freaked out. Gully doesn't even know what's going on. Scapegoat is blind, and she's just hanging out with her giant beetle, and she didn't explain any of this to anyone. These poor wards.
I know. Yeah, so she's flying up on Atlas in the sky, and she's giving erections to Wanton, who's driving the van, and they head back to where the others are or were, because Tattletale and the others aren't where they were supposed to be. Yeah. So Gully communicates with the heroes using her armband, and they're led to a larger gathering of heroes where Tattletale is arguing in favor of her plan.
Yeah, and that beat of them not being there anymore shows more reckless, unusual behavior on Tattletale. Like the fact that they would move without relaying that information back to their team members, it's crazy.
Yeah. Especially, because Noelle could pop out at any time,
Yeah.
So Tattletale is being unusually aggressive and reckless, provoking people when she should want to be allies with them, saying things she shouldn't say, and it leads to Miss Militia knocking her down and shoving a gun in her mouth to shut her up.
Yeah, and it's really, like, you go through the first time and you read this, and you just read for fun, And then when I go back and when you pull out all this information and put it down on our script for us, it's amazing how many times we hit that Tattletale is behaving strangely beat when you summarize it. Like it becomes so much more obvious when we do it this way. And
yeah, and I wasn't going out of my way to be like, I'm gonna cherry pick all the Tattletale moments. This is just what happens when you try to make a synopsis of this section.
Yeah, and I think it makes it a lot more transparent that we're doing this intentionally. We're like, here's reckless Lisa again. She's driven by something. I can't even speculate at this point, man. I honestly don't know. I'm assuming it has to do with her trigger event because that's the setup we got in the first chapter, that I still think I've guessed correctly on in my speculation from so many weeks ago. And so maybe she's lumping Noelle like into the same category that she's put Taylor, and she like needs to help her. Maybe someone else. I honestly don't know anymore. And I can't even like properly speculate on it.
Yeah, I think at this point you probably don't have enough information to properly speculate on it.
Yeah,
but
I mean, it feels to me like we're laying the groundwork and we're intentionally setting up that something is wrong with her, but we are very intentionally leaving both Taylor and the audience confused. So I don't think this is a case of me missing setup beats, but like I'm definitely not supposed to know right now.
Yeah. Regarding her behavior, like it's actually been kind of subtle up to now. It's not fully your attention is not fully being drawn to her behavior being weird, although it is present.
Yeah.
But this is the point, like when Miss Militia knocks her down and Skitter actually like puts her arms out to stop the other Undersiders from stepping in to help her. And when Miss Militia is like, what's going on with her? Taylor is like, I don't know what's going on with her.
Yeah.
I don't know why she's being like this.
Like someone says, is this a clone of her? Yeah. and Taylor's like, nope, unfortunately, this is just Lisa. And yeah, like Taylor can't even defend her partner's actions anymore. Like that's how crazy she's gotten.
Yeah. So Skitter tries to calm things down by suggesting that everybody except the 3 high-ranking heroes leave so they can talk about the more sensitive and tactically important matters in private. But some won't leave, particularly the Case-53s, including Gully, who won't answers, and Weld. I like it says Weld approached her, their eyes met, and Weld came to a stop, turning around so that he stood just to her right. He didn't say a word. And I like that because like at first you think, or at least I thought Weld was gonna be like, come on, Gully, we got to give him their space because like he's the career man, right?
Yeah.
But he just stands next to her, and it's a bit surprising, but it is consistent.
It is. It absolutely is. And I think it goes back to what we talked about at the beginning of the episode, that this was set up in the Yamada chapter. It was set up in Weld's conversation with Skitter about secret identities. And in here in this moment, we see him make this choice. And I love this. I like them coming together, ignoring orders because they deserve to find out what made them, what happened to them, what is that. And like I'll get to my speculation on this in the end, but I just really think Weld is going to be changed like forever by this. Like this is the truth that is revealed to him here is fundamentally like destructive of everything that he thought he was a part of. And I can't see him being the same after this.
Yeah. So the heroes are still not inclined to let Tattletale speak. So she presses her head to Miss Militia's gun and says this is an idea that she's willing to die for. And she says that the Triumvirate are behind Cauldron and that they are Cauldron.
And this is one of those moments that we talk about when we talk about cinematic moments in this book, because the way Wildbow writes sometimes, it's very conducive to defining these moments in like a cinematic way in my head. Like you can see we have like the rumbling from Tattletale from Noelle like about to resurface. We have helicopters flying around. We have Tattletale with a gun to her head on her knees, everyone frozen around her, the Case-53 looking on. There's this moment of heightened tension, and you can see it play out. Like I can see the shots that would happen here, the dramatic pause, how everything would play out on film. And it's such a great moment. It's so good. Yeah.
I agree. There's quite a lot cinematic about this whole arc, really. So yeah, as they're talking, Legend sets down, and because he's been lip reading, and he outlines his sanitized version of what Cauldron is about, which he may or may not actually believe, and I think we'll kind of find out that he doesn't. And he claims that it was Manton stealing and selling Cauldron materials that then led to another group that actually made the K-63s.
Yeah, this is the same old argument they've made before, and we know that this is total bullshit, and we're pretty sure that Legend knows too, right? Because that was the whole lie detector thing where he determined that they were lying about that as well.
Yeah, I think so.
So my guess here is that Legend is like trying to keep going with the rest of the Triumvirate. He doesn't want them to know that he knows, and he's staying in his cover here. He doesn't want to be blown. Maybe he's trying to take Cauldron down from the inside. I'm not sure. Maybe I'm just being too hopeful because I like him so much, but that's my guess at least.
Mm-hmm. So Tattletale knows something is off, and we get a sense that after this interaction with Legend that she now suddenly has more to go on, but Skitter stops her from speaking, and then before things can progress, Echidna smashes up through a nearby parking garage.
Yeah, sure glad this giant monster appeared to distill all that dramatic tension between the superheroes.
Yeah.
Hooray.
What a relief.
Yeah. Whew.
Yeah. So now Echidna is twice as tall. Her limbs are much more robust. And she's growing more mouths, and she's covered in a crust of bone.
Oh, good. That's great.
Yeah. So we're good.
Yeah.
And then as Legend rejoins his comrades, Skitter detects him nod subtly at them.
Which is a confirmation for her that he was definitely not being completely honest. That's what she reads it as, at least. We still don't know if he's a double agent or not, or what's going on there, but yeah,
right.
We don't know
what exactly he's communicating to them, but it's definitely something deceptive.
Yeah. And that's the end.
Yeah, we had. I don't know if we nabbed all of the names. In fact, I'm pretty sure we did not. But we had one Skitter clone who was identified in the tags as a chitter, which I like.
That's pretty good, yeah.
And we already talked about Morgan. I think, yeah. There were a few other capes introduced. We maybe talk about them if they come up again.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
Yeah. So that was chapter. That was the first half of Arc 19.
Good stuff.
How about some speculations there, Scott?
All right. I don't have a lot. Whenever we do the first half of a two-parter, the speculations are a little hard because it's like you can see stuff that they're setting up for the short term, but you don't know where it's going to go. So it's hard. It's really hard. But yeah. I will say that there were no confirmed old ones. There were none this week. So nothing I was proven right or wrong on yet. But my new one that I the only one I have this week, unfortunately, is that I think Weld is done with the PRT and the wards after this. His career with them is over. I don't know what he's going to do. Maybe it'd be cool if he joined the Undersiders, but that's probably wishful thinking. But I just think like him being at this career, like we've talked about how like he dealt with all this by putting everything into his career and everything into who he was in the PRT, and for it to be revealed to him in this moment as kind of a lie, and he hasn't gotten the full truth yet. I suspect that he will. I don't know if it's going to probably Tattletale talking to him at some point later in the future, maybe after this whole fight is done, but he's going to get the full truth of this. He's going to find out what Cauldron is, and to have Cauldron as linked to the PRT as it is, I just think like he won't be able to remain part of this anymore. So unfortunately, I think he's done, which is kind of sad because I liked him as the ward captain, but I also understand it. I understand that kind of mentality.
That's cool. Yeah, I think there were probably some like pseudo predictions that are interleaved with our discussion today. Like you can predict that, like, I mean, you essentially did predict like Tattletale's issue that she's having has something to do with her trigger event. Like that's not the kind of thing that really lends itself to like a compact speculation, but like
right.
Like I think there's always enough evidence in the first half of an arc that you can say things like that, but those aren't the exciting things. So yeah. All right. Yeah, that wraps up our coverage of the first half of Arc 19 Scourge. I hope everyone enjoyed our discussion and hearing Scott's reactions. As always, we appreciate your feedback, and we're always trying to improve. So let us know if you have any advice, questions, or thoughts on this week's episode.
You can reach out to us via email at gotwormpod@gmail.com or on Twitter at gotwormpod, where I also do my weekly live reads. We might be moving the day of those a little bit. I haven't decided yet. I will, of course, announce it, but we currently do it Thursdays at noon. That might change a little bit. I'm not sure yet, but we'll definitely let you know. And my personal Twitter is at ScottDaly85. That's DALY. And Matt's is at Mordinafluff.
That's right, Scott. If you're not already subscribed to We've Got Worm, we strongly recommend you do so and never miss an episode. You can find us on iTunes, Stitcher, YouTube, Google Play, pretty much anywhere else in the world you can listen to podcasts.
And as always, you can find this, all the other podcasts we do, and all of our writing, essays, film, and TV criticism and more at dailyplanetfilms.com. This week on our main Daily Planet podcast feed, Matt and I were joined by Grand Maester James Gentry to talk all about Season 7 of Game of Thrones. Despite being pretty mixed on the season as a whole, I think it was a pretty great episode and a pretty fun conversation.
Yeah, I agree. We had fun. We also have a Patreon page, patreon.com/dailyplanetfilms. Again, that's DALY. If you like what we do here and want to help make sure we keep doing more, consider donating $1 a month or whatever else you can afford. Special thanks to new senior associate producer at the $40 level, Kyakan.
Thank you so much. I think that was Friday that donation came in. That made my weekend. Yeah. That was amazing. Thank you so much. That's so kind of you. Like we have to live up to this amount of money that you guys are giving us. It is incredible. And with that in mind, I released a little update on Friday about some changes that we're going to be making to the Patreon. We've talked about this on the podcast before, but I gave a little more update on there to show you guys exactly what we're going to do. We're going to be more transparent. We're going to show you exactly where your money is going. We're going to redefine our goals. We're going to redefine our Patreon rewards, and we're going to keep doing more stuff and adding more content and having more fun. This podcast, We've Got Worm, is not going anywhere. We're way past halfway through the book now, but we're not stopping with Worm. We have not announced what we're doing yet, but you can rest assured that we are not stopping. But we're also doing all these other things, and we're going to keep doing them. It's awesome. Thank you guys so much.
Yeah, really, thank you. And in case it's not obvious, we really do find these donations to be very motivating.
Oh yeah,
and rewarding.
Yeah.
Also, speaking of Patreon, of course, while you're over there, make sure you stop by Wildlow's page and toss some money his way, because that is the guy without which none of this would have happened.
Yeah, this would be a pretty lame podcast if he hadn't written the book.
Yeah, it would be strange.
What would we do? It'd be weird. And of course, if you can't spare any extra cash, that's absolutely fine. There are still tons of ways you can help us out. Maybe you can grow a self-propagating creature in a lab whose entire purpose is to go around recommending We've Got Worm to everyone it sees. Or if that's not a reasonable request for some reason, you could just rate and review us on iTunes, maybe. Yeah,
either one of those things, really.
Whichever is easier. This week's Spotlight review comes from #Matt I love this, which is hilarious, who gives us 5 stars and says, "Greetings from Egypt." Holy shit, Matt, we're global. Egypt. We've had Russia, we've had Egypt, we've had the UK. I think there was one from Australia. We're everywhere. Daily Planet worldwide.
Awesome.
Anyway, in this show, we tune in from Matt and Scott, 2 highly nerdy guys who discuss and dissect the wonderful work of fiction that is Wulululu's masterpiece. The immersion and breadth that this podcast added for the books to me was insane. From the tiny details about the first paragraph describes the chapter to the wild and scarily accurate speculations that Scott somehow voodoos his way through, makes this podcast a definite staple in my week. Keep it nerdy, guys. Worms Day is best day. That's awesome. Matt, they love us in Egypt.
Yeah.
As this is the only review we've gotten from Egypt, I'm going to go ahead and safely make the assumption that this opinion is representative of the entire country.
That's what I tend to do.
Yeah. So thank you, #Matt I love this. And thank you, Egypt. if you need my photo for your renovations of the Sphinx, just reach out to me on Twitter. I'll send it over, and just let me know what it looks like when it's done.
Yeah, we look forward to that. Next week, we've got the conclusion of Arc 19 as the battle with Echidna appears to be coming to a head. Will anyone die in this battle? What the hell is going on with Tattletale? Why am I asking these questions when I clearly already know the answers? Tune in next Wednesday to find out. I don't know if you can tell, but like I went from being fine to being seriously congested in the course of this podcast.
I could tell you. It was okay.
I'm not sure. I guess I'm just sick now. I guess in the last 2 hours became sick. Yeah. Wasn't sick earlier today.
Maybe you were like swallowed by some kind of giant monster and got mutated bacteria all over you.
Yeah. I mean, or maybe I'm actually like I was replaced by a clone at one point. Like that sneeze you heard at one point was actually just me being like ripped, my throat ripped out and replaced by.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
Oh my God.
That's where your head goes. You read a lot of Worm and you start thinking in graphic terms.
Oh boy.